All right, so let's unpack this one. We're doing a deep dive today into a topic that on the surface feels like, glossy, high-production blockbuster entertainment. But when you really scratch that surface, you find these really sharp, kind of unforgiving edges of Hollywood's whole employment structure. We're specifically looking at the economics and the ethics around contract work on these massive multi-million-dollar sets.
Yeah, and today's sources really center on a story that's both, surprising and frankly pretty heartbreaking. It involves the Netflix juggernaut Stranger Things and the experience of one actress, Jennifer Marshall. What's so fascinating here is how this one specific anecdote, like a single casting decision, it becomes this powerful lens for viewing the much broader story of the quote-unquote corporate machine that really governs the entire entertainment industry today.
That's exactly it. Our mission for this deep dive is to analyze these claims about how these huge corporations, and Netflix is, one of the biggest, how they treat their contract work, especially when a personal, life-altering health crisis intersects with these incredibly demanding production schedules.
And the core case study is Jennifer Marshall. She plays Susan Hargrove, who is Max Mayfield's mother in Stranger. The central tension here is that Marshall's character was reportedly cut from season 5, the final season, right after her personal battle with stage 3 melanoma. And this decision, at least according to the commentary we've reviewed, it raises these huge questions. It's not just about creative choice more. It's about a professional actor's ability to maintain her essential union health insurance.
It really does strip away the illusion of Hollywood compassion, at least when you look at the business structure itself. I mean, we're talking about a franchise like Stranger Things. It's a global cultural phenomenon with budgets in the hundreds of millions of dollars.
Oh, yeah. Astronomical.
So the decisions they make about even minor recurring roles can have these massive ripple effects. And for an actor like Marshall, that decision translated into immediate, critical consequences that were tied directly to her health.
And her livelihood.
And her livelihood, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's the reality we need to drill down into today. I think we have to start by just establishing the character's importance and the narrative hole that her absence created.
Absolutely. So Jennifer Marshall plays Susan Hargrove. She's established as the mother of Max Mayfield, and anyone who watched the season 4 finale knows Max was left in this incredibly precarious, critically injured state, comatose, possibly paralyzed, and absolutely fighting for her life at the end of that.
So her position is critical. I mean, Susan Hargrove isn't a main character like the core kid, but she is Max's only remaining immediate family member, especially after what happened in season 3. So given the emotional weight of Max's situation, I mean, she's in a hospital bed fighting for her life. Her mother's presence it's not just narratively important, it's like mandated by basic human logic.
Yeah, for sure. And this is where the story first really became public. It didn't come from a press release or an official announcement. It surfaced through Jennifer Marshall's own reaction on social media. After her expected involvement in the final season was, not happening, she took to Instagram to question why her character would have abandoned.
Right. And her first post on social media was, it was pretty pointed.
Oh, yeah.
It framed the whole thing right away as this deep narrative failure within the show.
She asked her followers, and I'm looking at the exact quote from our analysis. She said, "Okay, folks, it's over, but where was she? What kind of mother isn't there for her child when she's in the hospital? Give me all."
And that immediately points to what the commentary we've looked at calls a major writing hole. I guess isn't a critical care set, a hospital. So the absence of her mother, the person who should be responsible for her, it's just glaringly illogical. The writers, just by leaving her out, created this huge narrative rupture in a show that's usually known for being so meticulous about character and emotion. And the analysis we read was really specific about this. It connected this absence to a long-standing trope in the show's history. The classic 80s movie problem where parents are just clueless.
Right, the MIA parent.
Exactly. For years, the critique notes, parents have been MIA or just conveniently oblivious. You have Nancy Wheeler's mom letting her disappear for hours with, no questions asked. The other parents seem to have no idea that there are, apocalyptic events happening in their own basement.
And that dynamic, it kind of worked in the earlier seasons. It let the kids have their own adventures, that classic kind of Goonies framework. But the commentary suggests that by season 5, the stakes have fundamentally changed. When a kid is comatose, possibly permanently injured, the parent's absence shifts from being like a funny 80s trope to something much, much more serious.
Right. The source we looked at contends that Marshall's literal, unexplained absence, Susan Hargrove, it ruins the writing.
Yeah.
It's an absence that just breaks the emotional realism that the show is built. So this logistical decision to cut Marshall, according to this analysis, it just fundamentally undermined the emotional sincerity of Max's whole storyline.
And this is where it gets even more complicated, because Marshall later revealed a key detail that showed this wasn't just, a narrative oversight. She mentioned in her later comments that she did film a scene related to the hospital situation, but that scene was ultimately cut out. So the character's presence was acknowledged, shot, and then it was deliberately thrown out in production.
Wow. Okay, that is a crucial piece of information. That confirms that her absence wasn't just a mistake in the script writing phase, like, oh, they forgot about the mom.
Right.
It was a calculated decision made much later, during editing, long after she'd already put in the time and the work.
And Marshall herself offered this really unsettling theory about why that footage was cut. She speculated, and this is her quote, "I think the writers were afraid I'd die, so they admitted it. I don't know." That's a heavy statement to make publicly.
Yeah, it is. The commentary we analyzed described that specific theory as sad and grotesque. It suggests a kind of cold, calculated risk assessment by the production. The implication is that the showrunners or the studio executive, they might not have wanted to deal with potential complications, like the emotional burden, the potential for bad PR, or just the logistical nightmare of scheduling an actress who was navigating a major health crisis, especially if she was going to be in the final, highly scrutinized season.
And that interpretation aligns perfectly with the source's overall cynical view of corporate decision-making in Hollywood. The suggestion is that instead of, navigating the reality of a valued worker's health, it was just deemed easier from a production risk standpoint to eliminate the storyline and the actress entirely. It really speaks to a prioritization of logistical simplicity and risk mitigation over creative consistency, or just basic human consideration for the act. The logic in this critical framework is purely transactional. You minimize complexity, you protect the schedule, and you ensure maximum output with minimum life.
And this is where it really shifts, doesn't it? It goes from just, analyzing a script
to these intense real-world stakes.
It takes the story from a conversation about a missing character to a much heavier issue involving life and death, health concerns, livelihood, and the very fragile economics of Hollywood employment. We know Marshall was battling cancer, but we really need to pin down the timeline to understand the gravity of this job for her. This is where it pivots from a critique of the show's writing to a critique of the industry's employment practice.
We can trace the timeline she shared. She went public with her diagnosis in a 2022 Facebook post. She revealed she was battling stage 3 melanoma. And this is not a mild diagnosis. It's a serious, aggressive, life-threatening cancer. It requires immediate and intensive treatment, which, it inevitably casts this huge shadow of uncertainty over any career, but especially one that depends on physical presence. And what's so crucial here is that the diagnosis overlapped directly with her employment on the show. She began her treatment while she was actively shooting Stranger Things Season 4. So this wasn't something that happened a long time ago. It was an ongoing, consuming battle during the period she was physically on set, working for Netflix.
And she didn't just mention it in passing. She gave specific, visceral details about how the treatment impacted her. She revealed that while she was filming Season 4, her hair was falling out. It got so bad, the production team had to put her in a wig for the role. She described her own hair as having the consistency of straw and being painful. That just paints this picture of a tremendous physical struggle happening while she's trying to meet the high demands of being on a multi-million-dollar set. She was literally fighting for her life while showing up to work.
The juxtaposition is just so stark. You have this glossy, visually perfect world of Stranger Things, and it's hiding this intense personal health crisis of one of its contributors. But the real urgency comes when we look at the Season 5 filming period. Marshall stated very clearly, and this is a fact we have to emphasize, that she was in remission during the shooting of Season 5.
That detail is absolutely central to the whole financial arc, because it immediately refutes any claim that her health status prevented her from doing the job. By the time the final season was in production, she was feeling physically and mentally ready to come back. So that shifts the focus completely away from her physical ability and back onto the content by the studio.
And this brings us right to the financial and, frankly, the humanitarian core of the story, the critical link between contract work and union health insurance. Marshall followed up her first Instagram post by explaining the precise, critical reason why coming back for Season 5 was so essential, and why this cut was just devastating. It wasn't just about the lost income. She specifically said that returning for even a few days would have helped her obtain health insurance from the union after her exhaustive battle with cancer.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are looking directly at the precarious nature of getting health insurance as a contract worker in entertainment. Fundamentally different from, continuous salaried employment. Actors who aren't series regulars or major stars, they typically operate within the SAG-AFTRA health. And to qualify for that coverage, you have to meet these minimum earnings thresholds or a minimum number of workdays within a specific 12.
Yeah, let's break down those thresholds because they are key to understanding Marshall's situation. The union plans often work on this, like rolling quarterly or semi-annual basis. Historically, Plan 1, which is the most comprehensive plan, might require earnings of, say, roughly $26,000 in a year, or a high number of days' work. Plan 2, which is less coverage, has a lower threshold. So for a recurring actor who isn't in every episode, they might be earning decent money. But if that work is spread out and doesn't hit the minimums within that specific qualification period,
they fall off the plan.
They fall off the plan completely.
And when you are dealing with a critical illness like stage 3 melanoma, which requires ongoing monitoring, potential follow-up treatments, and just massive medical expenses, falling off that union plan is catastrophic. It really is. The union plans, especially SAG-AFTRA's, they often provide a much more robust safety net than anything you can get on the open market, particularly when you're dealing with pre-existing conditions and high utilization.
So those few days of filming in season 5, a role that was, as we established, narratively justified and required minimal time, that represented not just a modest paycheck for Jennifer Marshall, it was a lifeline, a vital, non-negotiable lifeline. It was her ticket back into sustained, essential union health coverage after this major, incredibly expensive, life-threatening illness. The timing of the decision to cut her meant the stakes were literally existential.
The commentary we analyzed used this exact detail to frame the production company's action as, well, profoundly callous corporate behavior. The critique is incredibly simple, but it's sharp. This is a net company operating with astronomical budgets and most expensive. Yet the sources contend they were not thinking about. The claim is that they just failed to follow up on the real-world consequences for the very product's success.
It fundamentally changes the decision from a typical creative choice, like do we need this scene or not, into an immediate practical consequence of the gig economy model when it's applied to high-end entertainment. It just brutally underscores the point that even successful professional working actors are operating on a knife edge when it comes to their safety. If you fall short of the work quota for the union plan, you lose your coverage, which, after a battle with cancer, is an immediate financial and health crisis.
Exactly. Marshall's status as a contract worker meant she wasn't entitled to the kind of continuous care that, say, a major studio's salaried executive staff would get. The sources argue that for a production company that's drowning in cash, this tiny expenditure, a few scenes with a returning actress, would have been an absolutely insignificant budget line, a drop in the... Yet that small decision held these devastating, life-altering consequences.
The dissonance is just. It's palpable. You have a multi-billion-dollar operation, yet the security of one of its dedicated, hard-working professionals rests on whether a few scenes are filmed or edited out. The source material sees this as irrefutable evidence that when the numbers are crunched, human concern is just easily discarded.
And it's fascinating how Marshall navigated this whole thing publicly, given the stakes we've just laid out. Her public statements, which we should look at closely, they maintain this tone of immense gratitude and professionalism, which stands in stark contrast to the harsh, almost aggressive criticism leveled by the commentary we reviewed against the studio and the industry.
Her public statements show a level of professionalism that a lot of people found really commendable, if, maybe strategically necessary. She elaborated in a statement describing her role as Susan Hargrove as an opportunity of a lifetime. She was very clear that she would have been ecstatic to return, framing the work in a really positive light.
She also clearly articulated the multi-layered benefit that returning would have given her, going beyond just the money. She said, and I'm quoting, "It would have helped me out not only financially, but it would have been a mental and emotional uplift after battling cancer for almost 2 years." And that's a crucial detail. It highlights the psychological aspect of work, the importance of structure, community, feeling productive, all of which were just abruptly taken away from her.
And this is where her diplomacy really shines through. And it probably reflects the ingrained need to never burn a bridge in Hollywood. She showed this acute self-awareness about the reality of the business. She said, "Either way, no one's entitled to a role, cancer or not. My heart remains grateful." And crucially, she went on to offer the decision makers the benefit of the doubt and stated that she holds no ill will towards anyone, although she did admit she was definitely surprised not to be called back.
That level of diplomacy is incredibly notable, especially when she has such legitimate, potentially devastating. She's professionalizing a deeply painful and vulnerable. But the commentary we reviewed immediately stepped in to reject that great. The external critique basically says, I won't give them the benefit of the doubt because I know how these corporate structures operate.
Right, and that sets up this complete philosophical opposition at the heart of the story. You have the need for the contract worker to maintain a public face of gratitude versus the external critique that sees that very gratitude as proof of corporate exploit.
We also have to consider the specific context of her previous interaction with the Duffer Brothers, the show's creator. This conversation, which happened during the filming of, it makes the later decision to cut her character even more jarring. It creates this narrative of contradiction.
Okay, so what exactly happened in that earlier conversation?
Marshall detailed that back in 2022, she courageously shared her diagnosis directly with the Duffer Brothers, and her specific, poignant request to them was critical. She urged them not to write her out of the show because of kindness and about her health. She emphasized that the days she spent on set were not a burden at all. They were, in her words, a bright light in an otherwise dark and depressing time. She clearly found the work therapeutic and necessary for her mental well, not just her income.
Wow. So she was actively seeking work as a form of healing and stability. What was their immediate recorded response to this incredibly vulnerable?
She said they expressed their concern, offered their well wishes, and urged me to contact them if I knew. Marshall described them as such level and said she was thrilled to note and to have worked. So this paints a picture of, real human empathy, at least at the creator level of the production.
But then the external commentary we reviewed pivots dramatic. It claims that regardless of the Duffer Brothers' initial good intention, which they admit might have been genuine, the corporate machinery that ultimately controlled the budget, the liability, and the final cuts just overruled any personal sentiment. The source claims they kind of ignored her during this next part of the production process.
This really raises a critical question. How do we synthesize these two competing narratives? On one hand, you have Marshall's desire to believe in the goodwill of the creative, which reflects her professionalism and gratitude. On the other hand, the critique insists that Marshall's situation proves that Hollywood, when you view it through the lens of contract labor, is just fundamentally cutthroat, run by people who are only trying to extract the almighty dollar and manage risk at every single turn.
The commentary we analyzed, crystal clear about the alleged corporate motive behind the decision to cut the scene and then abandon the character for season 5. They believe that the studio's true driver was simply eliminating complications and perceived liability. They claim the production's attitude was highly pragmatic, bordering on ruthless, basically. Oh, she has cancer. That's just going to be tough to film on. We're just going to get rid of it. Get rid of that part. It's just not worth it.
That interpretation characterizes the decision as entirely risk-averse and purely financially calculated. In this cynical view, a minor inconvenience like the need for flexible scheduling, the potential liability if her health got worse, or just the emotional weight of dealing with an employee battling cancer, that inconvenience outweighed the minimal cost of giving the actress a few days of work that would secure her health coverage. This disparity just highlights the profound chasm between the personal, often existential needs of a creative worker and the cold, unfeeling risk management calculations of a multi-billion-dollar production.
The source also really emphasizes the dehumanization that's inherent in this system. They state that once Marshall's situation introduced a risk, she became not useful for them. And, to use the highly critical phrasing from the source, that's not even a human. That's how this corporate entertainment machine allegedly views contract labor as disposable, interchangeable resource whose utility dictates their worth, a worth that is instantly negated by any complication.
It's a powerful, highly critical framing that views the entire process from hiring to editing as driven not by artistic necessity or human empathy, but by the relentless, hyper-efficient pursuit of maximizing profit, regardless of the human cost incurred by the individuals providing the talent. It suggests that even the best intentions of the creators are ultimately overridden by the financial inertia.
So, if we step back, what does this specific story imply about the health of the broader industry? The source material frames this Marshall story as like a microcosm of a larger systemic problem in modern Hollywood. The idea that creatives, even those working on the world's biggest hits, are essentially disposable contract labor with minimal safety nets provided by their employer.
Our sources explicitly note that these actors, though they are highly visible, are fundamentally contract workers in Hollywood, and they often don't get normal health benefits and things like that directly from the company producing the show. This is a fundamental structural issue that underpins all the glamour. For anyone who isn't a permanent staff member or a guaranteed series regular on a long contract, employment is project to project, which makes access to long-term health benefits inherently precarious, totally dependent on external.
And this reality stands in stark contradiction to the glossy, glamorous image that the studios project to the public. The critique argues instead that studios are actively trying to do things as cheaply as possible everywhere and are actually just not nice to their creatives all the way throughout the process.
Yeah.
It positions the studios, like Netflix or Disney, as constantly seeking to minimize labor costs and liability, even if it means eroding the safety net for professional talent.
And that's why Marshall's reliance on a few days of season 5 work for her union eligibility is such a potent illustration of the system's failure. It confirms that the mechanism designed to protect these workers, the SAG-AFTRA health plan, is entirely dependent on the studio offering sufficient employment in the first. So when the studio, in this case allegedly for risk aversion, withholds even a small amount of necessary employment, it pulls the rug out from under the worker's ability to access critical care.
And to show that Marshall's case isn't just an isolated incident of bad luck, the commentary we reviewed provided a similar situation. An analogy involving an actress from a Star Wars series being produced by Disney another massive corporate entity responsible for generating all this blockbuster content.
This analogy is used specifically to reinforce the systemic, patterned nature of the labor problem. The source describes the situation of this Star Wars actress, who allegedly wasn't offered a role in the next, but the critical detail is what she said would have happened even if she had been offered the job.
That detail is particularly devastating. She claimed that even if she had been called back, she couldn't afford to accept the role because she couldn't secure the necessary health care for her children through the union system and would have had to take away from her life to do so.
And this illustrates a fundamental paradox. Here you have a professional actress working at the highest levels of the industry on one of the world's most successful franchises. And the opportunity itself is rendered essentially unaffordable because it fails to provide the basic infrastructure, specifically continuous family health care, to support her dependents. It suggests the financial insecurity is so great that professional work can become a net liability rather than a benefit.
That analysis really reinforces the claim that the challenge of securing basic necessities like healthcare is a pervasive pattern. It's affecting professional actors across all the major streaming platforms and production companies. It emphasizes the deep insecurity that's just inherent in this contract-based, project-to-project employment structure described in the source material. The sources portray modern Hollywood as having adopted the most ruthless, exploitative aspects of the gig economy.
Which leads us directly to the final, overarching critique of the corporate entertainment provided by our most critical. And it's a perspective we have to report with full impartiality, making sure we frame this very charged assessment as their specific interpretation of the system. The source's assessment is that the industry is an evil corporate machine.
That is a very complex and highly polarized indictment. The critique asserts that the industry's focus goes beyond just extracting profit through content. They claim the corporate strategy is centered on pushing a specific message, which the source defines pretty dismissively as generic feminist gay BIPOC elements, while at the same time achieving what they call corporate brainwashing propaganda and compelling consumers to consume at the same time.
To unpack that source's viewpoint, what they're arguing is that the studio's political and social messaging, while it might seem progressive or altruistic on the surface, is actually a calculated corporate tool. The source contends that this type of content acts as a smoke, drawing attention away from the severe internal labor aggregation and the underlying financial extraction model. They label the entire output, the shows, the massive branding, the marketing hype, as slop incarnate.
So this frames the industry as being driven by this duality: extreme profit extraction paired with a sophisticated ideological strategy. The source claims that the creatives are not the ones who benefit from things, and neither are the viewers who are being subjected to this propaganda. The only people who do benefit, according to this highly critical perspective, are the corporate goons behind the mask and the true believers in the political causes being pushed through the content.
This specific critique is important because it links the Jennifer Marshall story directly to their ideological argument. The source argues that the decision to cut an actress fighting cancer, thereby sacrificing her health coverage for a marginal saving or risk avoid, proves that the studio's purported political leanings are hollow. They see this act of cost-cutting and human disregard as the ultimate evidence that the industry is driven solely by extraction, using political content as a convenient, marketable distraction.
It is an assertion that really demands reflection. How can an industry claim to champion social justice or progressive values in its content, the messaging the source refers, when its internal labor practices, as evidenced by the Jennifer Marshall case, appear so fundamentally devoid of basic human concern for its own dedicated work?
The emphasis is on the intense. The studios are producing these complex, emotionally resonant narratives with staggering budgets, media branding, and social mess. Yet they are simultaneously operating with such tight, short-sighted financial decisions regarding contract labor that they actively undermine the basic well-being of the very people whose talent makes that content possible. The decision to cut Marshall, in this critical view, is the system revealing its true mercenary nature.
We started this deep dive with a pretty simple question about a missing character in a hit show, Susan Hargrove. And through the lens of Jennifer Marshall's experience, we ended up looking into the extremely harsh economic realities faced by professional actors battling major health crises while trying to maintain union benefits. The story puts a very human, painful face on the often abstract concept of Hollywood labor practices and the cold mathematics of multi-billion-dollar production.
What stands out here, above all else, is the intense and immediate pressure felt by these contracts, when their livelihood, their critical health coverage, and their emotional well-being are all tied to the uncertainty of a short-term, episodic contract. It's just immense. The profound contrast between Marshall's publicly grateful professional demeanor, despite what she was enduring, and the harsh, immediate consequences of a single calculated casting decision is the central tension in this entire story.
And it forces us to reflect on that fundamental contradiction. How can an industry that produces global cultural phenomena and generates staggering wealth operate on a labor model so unstable that a veteran recurring actress working on its flagship show can nearly lose her critical health coverage because she was short a few days of guaranteed employment.
The conclusion drawn by the highly critical commentary is that the creators and stars who bring the glamour are, ultimately, just disposable cogs in a massive corporate machine. A machine designed purely for financial extraction, with zero interest in the human element beyond their immediate utility and the minimization of corporate life. This structural insecurity, they argue, is simply the cost of doing business in modern Hollywood.
It's a sobering thought, but an essential one for really understanding the economics of modern entertainment.
Indeed. It forces you to look past the red carpet and at the financial spreadsheets that dictate human output.
If major franchises, with budgets in the hundreds of millions, are relying on systems where the employment of a veteran recurring actress for just a few days can mean the difference between having critical health insurance and not, what does that imply about the stability and ethic of the modern entertainment labor structure, even for those working at the highest tiers of success? This is something to mull over the next time you hear about a show being canceled, or a character being written off, or a studio executive touting her company's commitment to their creative family.
It's a crucial reminder that the spectacular emotional content we consume is often built upon a foundation of deep economic security for the people who dedicated their lives and their health.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.